The February fog of 2026 hanging over London does not hide the truth. It carries the scent of a constitutional execution. For centuries, the palace has kept its darkest secrets buried behind impenetrable walls of stone. But when the very survival of the throne is threatened by traitors, the crown draws its most absolute weapon, constitutional protocol. When a desperate Prince Harry submitted a private DNA report from California to reclaim royal status for Archie and Lilibet, he naively believed he was appealing to his brother. He made a fatal miscalculation. The man sitting across from him was no longer William. He was the future king of the Iron Era. William is utterly indifferent to tears or biological markers. He simply deployed the ancient born of the body rule, a centuries-old legal machine that possesses no heart, designed to crush pity in order to protect the purity of the dynasty. The war is no longer about playing the victim on television. It is a merciless institutional purge. The darkest secrets of a Tijuana surrogacy clinic, altered birth certificates hidden in the shadows, and tens of millions of pounds frozen in royal trusts are tightening like a noose around Montecito's neck. Hold your breath and enter the most earth-shattering chapter of the Windsor Chronicles, the judgment of the bloodline and the sentence of total erasure. February 24th, 2026, opened under a veil of London mist, the kind that usually softens the edges of the city. But by 9 a.m., that softness was gone, cut clean through by a statement from Buckingham Palace that landed with surgical precision, confirming that Prince William had formally refused to accept a private DNA report submitted by Prince Harry. The report was intended to verify that Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor was Harry's biological son and therefore eligible for the royal registry. Yet the refusal was not framed as a denial of blood, but as a defense of process, of protocol, and of rules older than any living royal, shifting the conflict from family tension to constitutional confrontation almost instantly. Because this was never presented as sibling rivalry, but as an institutional safeguard, Harry's legal team had come prepared with what they believed was an unassailable file: medical documentation of genetic tests conducted in California, a sworn affidavit from Meghan Markle detailing her pregnancies, records from private obstetricians in Beverly Hills, and notarized statements from hospital staff. It was a compilation designed to restore royal status for Archie and Lilibet and secure their place within the line of succession, a move that was deeply personal for Harry after years away from the United Kingdom. Yet William's response was immediate and unwavering as he convened the Sovereign Succession Security Council, a body rarely assembled and composed of legal, intelligence, and archival authorities. Within hours, a royal freeze was issued on Archie's integration into the royal framework, citing irregularities and contradictions that cast doubt not on existence, but on compliance. The bloodline files that surfaced from palace aides cataloged concerns in meticulous detail, beginning with visual forensics surrounding Meghan's pregnancy, where photographs from London events in March 2019 appeared inconsistent within hours, raising questions that analysts argued could not be naturally explained. This was followed by the absence of medical oversight by Crown-appointed physicians, unlike the births of William's children. With no hospital discharge forms filed with royal doctors and no signatures recorded within the Royal Archives or General Register Office, the omission was viewed not as minor, but as potentially disqualifying under long-standing succession standards. Then attention shifted to Archie's birth certificate, which had been amended nearly a month after issuance, replacing Meghan's full name with her royal title. A revision Williams' team contrasted with the unchanged documentation of Catherine's children, interpreting the amendment as an irregular manipulation of official records. Financial audits added another layer when cyber experts traced a wire transfer, sent days before Archie's public birth announcement, to a reproductive clinic in Tijuana specializing in gestational surrogacy, accompanied by encrypted notes referencing a non-disclosure agreement. This raised the constitutional issue of the born of the body rule embedded in British law for centuries, a principle that defines eligibility not simply by genetics, but by the manner of birth. Even the DNA test itself became a focal point because it was conducted by a boutique California laboratory lacking ISO 17025 accreditation for forensic standards recognized in the United Kingdom, with the sample reportedly delivered by a non-neutral party identified as Meghan's former chief of staff. Internal correspondence attributed to Harry's attorney, Douglas Hall, emphasized optics over scientific rigor, language that intensified palace skepticism and reinforced William's insistence on independent, Crown-supervised verification. This forced the situation into a higher arena, where Harry responded with a dramatic pivot, flying to the United Kingdom with Archie and Lilibet under limited visibility, landing at a secure military airfield before proceeding to a Crown-appointed medical facility. There, independent DNA testing would be overseen by Crown geneticists, witnessed by a High Court judge, and executed according to strict forensic protocol. Harry agreed to this, recognizing that the outcome would either vindicate his position or cement the palace's objections. Across the Atlantic, Meghan addressed the public directly through a raw video recorded in California, framing the inquiry as punitive and dehumanizing. She accused William of orchestrating what she described as a genetic witch hunt and portrayed the investigation as an attempt at erasure rather than truth-seeking, a message that spread rapidly, dividing opinion between those who saw a mother defending her children and those who viewed the monarchy as safeguarding continuity. After soundgay of examination, the Royal Commission delivered its finding, confirming Harry's biological parentage while concluding that constitutional compliance had not been verified due to missing doctor signatures, amended documentation, and financial evidence i.e. gestational surrogacy. It was a verdict that did not deny blood but separated it from recognition, leaving King Charles III facing a profound tension due to being a private grandfather and a public sovereign. Ultimately, the palace suspended titles and adjusted succession listings without public disclosure of the bloodline files, presenting Harry with an impossible calculus: remain in the United Kingdom, view his children as private citizens without royal privileges, or return to the United States, where the suspension could harden into permanence. In that quiet Windsor guest lodge, as night settled, Harry confronted the realization that he had entered a system governed not by sentiment but by procedure, that within the monarchy, biology alone does not secure status, that law and continuity override emotion, and that the battle unfolding was not simply about names on a registry, but about the enduring authority of the Crown to define legitimacy on its own terms. Inside the palace, the morning after the report was finalized, the air felt charged, not loud, but electric, as if everyone understood that something irreversible had shifted. Courtiers moved through corridors in hushed exchanges because the ALEC findings had drawn a hard line that could not be softened by sympathy. Princess Anne stood firmly behind Prince William's stance, insisting that an independent medical and legal review was not cruelty, but preservation. Tranquille Prince Edward wrestled quietly with discomfort over the severity of the optics, even as he acknowledged that inaction would leave the Crown exposed to future disputes. Queen Camilla maintained a composed silence in public, yet reinforced privately that the monarchy must remain above scandal and stand taller than controversy, signaling that sentiment could not outrank structure. At the center of this tightening circle, Harry remained in the Windsor Estate guest lodge with Archie and Lilibet, trying to create fragments of normality within a framework that no longer treated them as royal. There were no HRH titles, no automatic security, and no ceremonial acknowledgement. The privileges that once seemed inherited were now suspended pending constitutional clarity. The palace machine moved methodically as security teams retraced every transatlantic flight, every domestic movement, and every financial transaction, logging travel manifests and courier deliveries into the historical record. The ALEC report built an evidentiary chain designed to withstand scrutiny in but-key domestic or international forum, procedural, exhaustive, and almost clinical in its authority. Beyond the palace gates, the public sphere ignited with competing narratives. Journalists stationed outside Buckingham Palace and Windsor speculated on arrival times and sealed vehicles. Commentators debated whether this was a family fracture or an institutional reckoning. Social media divided sharply between those who viewed Meghan as confronting an archaic system and those who regarded William as defending continuity against potential deception. Inside the monarchy, the focus never drifted toward popularity. It remained anchored to documentation. Meghan's legal strategy evolved simultaneously, presenting arguments that Archie and Lilibet's rights as dual UK and US citizens transcended internal royal authority, framing the suspension of titles as institutional erasure. She reinforced her role as a mother and caregiver qua educational records, sworn testimonies from caretakers, birthday documentation, and even a personal letter to Tyler Perry affirming her maternal presence, building a case grounded not in ceremony, but in lived reality. The monarchy responded with a single consistent premise: existence does kongbang eligibility. Recognition within the royal household requires verified adherence to centuries-old succession standards. The tension the brothers hardened into icy formality during a brief phone exchange described as sharp and measured, every word deliberate, every pause weighted by history. Harry reportedly felt betrayed not only by William, but by the structure that elevated protocol above blood. William held steady to the principle that the integrity of succession must remain insulated from emotional influence, shifting their conflict from personal grievance to a philosophical divide over what defines royalty itself. The independent medical tribunal overseeing the DNA verification executed its mandate with uncompromising precision. Crown-appointed geneticists collected samples from Archie and Lilibet under strict supervision, with every stage witnessed by a high court judge to eliminate doubt. For Harry, the kingship was both necessary and humbling, an acknowledgement that only palace-sanctioned procedure could formalize legitimacy within this system. Financial implications intensified the stakes as the Diana Trust, valued at more than £22 million, was effectively frozen for the Sussex children pending verification. Trustees acted under fiduciary obligation, and the impact was immediate, limiting access to resources tied tip to royal status. This underscored that legitimacy here carries tangible consequences beyond symbolism, shaping inheritance, security, and influence. King Charles navigated his role carefully. Having previously drafted memos noting inconsistencies in timelines and procedural gaps, he now allowed William to lead publicly key retaining ultimate authority, balancing private affection with sovereign duty. Every decision reverberated across generations. As days progressed, the children became symbols in a beau discourse about tradition, power, and modern identity. Photographs and statements were dissected for implication. Key commissioners remained insulated from the spectacle, concentrating solely on bank transfers, amended certificates, travel logs, medical documentation, and sworn affidavits. Eventually, they reaffirmed that although a biological connection to Harry was established, the constitutional threshold remained unmet. Within the guest lodge, Harry adapted to a new rhythm, measured compliance for fatherhood. He read to his children, shielding them from the noise beyond the gates, conscious that every action was observed, documented, and archived. Meghan's media campaign continued to frame the review as emblematic of outdated structures and systemic bias, drawing millions into the conversation and reframing the dispute as a clash of modern transparency via inherited authority. Yet, the palace did not deviate from its stance that procedure supersedes perception. As another sunrise approached, the unresolved tension lingered heavy over Windsor. Titles suspended, succession adjusted, and recognition deferred. Harry was left confronting a stark reality. Within the monarchy, legitimacy is constructed qua verified process rather than emotion. And the cost of challenging that framework extends far beyond headlines into the architecture of history itself. The days following the ruling did not ease into calm. They tightened every hour, measured against protocol. As Harry moved through the Windsor Estate guest lodge under a reality that felt both temporary and permanent at once, the palace was unyielding in its insistence that emotion could not negotiate with constitutional structure. Every step of Archie and Lilibet was documented. Every outing was restricted. Even the smallest routine was filtered qua layers of approval. The children sensed the tension without understanding its scale, clinging to their father's hands. The world debated their legitimacy in headlines and live streams. Outside the gates, social media fractured into rival camps. Some portrayed Meghan and Harry as confronting an institution frozen in time. Others praised Prince William for shielding the monarchy from what they viewed as procedural manipulation. Analysts dissected the born of the body rule and traced its origins qua centuries of British succession law, emphasizing that eligibility within the royal line is not defined by affection or even confirmed biology alone, but by strict adherence to documented standards. Inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was quieter, yet no less intense, calculated rather than chaotic. William, supported by Princess Anne, ensured every legal requirement was airtight, every memorandum archived, and every internal communication cross-checked to prevent loopholes. Advisors worked around the clock because a single oversight could fracture institutional credibility, transforming the palace into a fortress of bureaucracy built to defend continuity in a media-saturated era. Harry began to recognize that the battle had expanded beyond DNA reports and affidavits into something more fuktap, a struggle over narrative dominance. While the palace relied on silence for documentation, Meghan leveraged immediacy. Her earlier video echoed across platforms, shaping perception before official responses could even crystallize. Each photograph of Archie and Lilibet was reposted or reinterpreted. Each legal filing was framed as proof of either injustice or defiance, depending on the viewer's lens. Financial leverage deepened the strain as the Diana Trust remained frozen for the children pending constitutional validation. More than £22 million was suspended, kongfai as punishment, but as a fiduciary obligation. Yet for Harry, the distinction offered little comfort. The freeze limited access to funds tied trick-tip to status, reinforcing that recognition inside this institution is inseparable to material consequence. Within the lodge, his routine became regimented. Mornings were structured around parenting, afternoons were dominated by consultations with legal counsel, while evenings were heavy for reflection. He knew that every document signed and every compliance book completed was another attempt to navigate a maze, thick case centuries before his birth. The weight of precedent pressed against personal resolve. Journalists maintained a constant vigil outside Buckingham and Windsor, broadcasting speculation about travel manifests and sealed convoys, debating whether this conflict signaled modernization or retrenchment. Meanwhile, the palace maintained a deliberate silence that only amplified curiosity, fueling commentary across continents. King Charles continued his strategic balance, privately aware of the emotional implications, yet publicly aligned with William's procedural enforcement. Correspondence prepared months earlier now formed the backbone of institutional defense, ensuring that no measure could withstand legal or historical examination. Harry's isolation sharpened into clarity as he grasped that the monarchy operates on a principle that continuity outweighs sentiment, that individual desire yields to collective preservation, and that his children's presence in the United Kingdom placed them in a liminal space, acknowledged biologically, yet denied constitutional recognition. Effectively, it was a soft exile scenario in which he could keep them in Britain as private citizens without titles or privileges, or return to the United States, where the suspension might calcify into permanence. It was a strategic corner that demanded calculation rather than impulse. Through it all, Archie and Lilibet became symbols far larger than themselves, their childhood unfolding beneath the scrutiny of succession law and global opinion. Harry was determined to shield their emotional world, even as their legal world remained contested. Every bedtime story and shared laugh was tinged with awareness that history was being written around them. The palace reinforced its authority by tightened security protocols and monitored communications. Advisors cataloged interactions to preserve procedural integrity, demonstrating that institutional survival depends on documentation rather than debate. As weeks advanced, the implications stretched beyond this singular dispute, setting a precedent for future generations. It clarified that within the monarchy, legitimacy is constructed through verified compliance, not merely lineage, and that the intersection media influence of constitutional law now defines modern royal conflict. This left Hyanm positioned on opposite sides of an unspoken philosophical divide. One enforcing rules designed to protect continuity, the other fighting for recognition grounded in personal truth. At the center were High de Tre, whose existence is unquestionable, yet whose status remains suspended, illustrating that within this framework, blood alone does command the crown. Recognition flows from protocol. As the standoff stretched from days into weeks, the Waitqua-Alec ruling settled into something heavier than shock. It became structure, a new normal defined by suspended titles, a controlled movement. Harry felt it in the smallest details. In the way security briefings replaced casual outings, in the way every request required clearance, in the way Archie Lilibate's laughter echoed against walls that were kept protective confining. The palace had Comfi expelled them, yet it had Comfi embraced them either. It had placed them in suspension, biologically acknowledged, yet constitutionally paused. That distinction shaped everything from access to royal security to the frozen status quo Diana Trust, where more than 22 trillion remained inaccessible pending verification. Trustees were bound by fiduciary duty rather than sentiment, reinforcing that within this institution, money, status, the legitimacy are braided together thonqua law thonqua affection. Beyond Windsor, the debate only intensified. International outlets cycled thonqua legal experts who parsed the born of the body rule, examined historical precedents. Commentators framed the conflict as either an overdue modernization struggle or a necessary defense of continuity. Meanwhile, Meghan's team sustained its counter-narrative, emphasizing lived motherhood, documented caregiving, by the argument that institutional procedure had crossed into erasure. Her earlier video continued to ripple across digital platforms, shaping perception in real time. Yet inside the palace walls, perception carried it weight hun paperwork. William's position remained fixed on Mwintuk, that succession cannot be vulnerable to ambiguity, that Ngeka, the slightest procedural irregularity today, could become a destabilizing precedent tomorrow. Princess Anne's steady support underscored that this was viewed internally, Comfi as cruelty, but as insulation, a barrier erected to protect future generations to uncertainty. King Charles maintained his careful equilibrium, privately aware of familial fracture, yet publicly bauhiot suit necessity của compliance. The memos he had drafted months truxade, serving as quiet scaffolding beneath the decision, ensuring that every action aligned with established constitutional interpretation. Harry confronted a narrowing corridor of options: remain in the Vunquakang, where his children would grow up Konka titles, Konka automatic privileges, by their royal identity effectively dormant, or return to the Huaki, where that dormancy could harden into permanence. Moi path mangtheo emotional va historical consequences. Through it all, the children remained unaware of the magnitude surrounding them, their days structured by play of a routine. Ngekaki their names circulated thonqua legal briefs va media panels, embodying the human center của a dispute framed in policy language. Harry's internal conflict sharpened into a realization that this battle was never purely about proving paternity, because that had been confirmed. It was about satisfying a framework that defines legitimacy thonqua documentation of birth circumstances, verified oversight, a strict adherence to succession law. It is a framework that predates modern medicine, va social media, yet governs the present. The palace's silence continued, strategic va deliberate, refusing to release the bloodline files publicly, Tronqui standing firmly by the commission's findings, allowing speculation to swirl, Konka direct rebuttal, confident that institutional continuity rests Konfi on applause, but on precedent. The broader implications began to crystallize. This was no longer solely a dispute Guahayanem, but a case study in how a centuries-old monarchy navigates contemporary challenges, how media narratives collide with archival law, but how personal truth intersects with institutional requirement. As another London sunrise cut thonqua the mist, the lesson felt stark. Legitimacy within this realm is constructed, Konfi assumed, shaped by protocol, safeguarded by oversight, va enforced by those entrusted with continuity. This left Harry holding his children close inside the guest lodge, contemplating a future in which their biological connection to him is undeniable, yet their place within the royal structure remains conditional. Meanwhile, William stands resolute in the conviction that preserving the integrity qua succession demands unwavering adherence to established rules. The monarchy endures, steadied by procedure, Ngekaki, the emotional cost reverberates thongkwajading bonds of a public discourse. A reminder that within this system, blood may begin the story, but recognition is what ultimately defines Naw. If you want more deep dives into stories that shape history in real time, make sure you share this via subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Drop your thoughts below, because in stories like this, your voice is part of a conversation.